All right. Good morning, everyone. It's about 1:45 on this lovely Sunday here in the basement. Welcome to the stream. This is just a casual Sunday morning thing that I'm trying to do a little more of because I realize it's just sometimes nice to hang out and do stuff, work on stuff, talk, chat. So again, good morning. It it's going to be really unpleasant here today. Even though I'm in southwestern Ontario, Canada, we do get some of the strongest weather shifts you can possibly have. So today it is going to be 32 degrees Celsius, which is about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is the reason I'm going to spend the majority of my day down here in the basement. Heat is not the weather of my people. We don't like it. So anyway, good morning to everybody. So let's see. I saw a bunch of people were in the chat already, and a special shout out to George McCormick, who is watching me from Glasgow, Scotland. So good morning to you. I'm sure it's afternoon time for you at the very least, but good morning anyway. Let me see. Lord Nikon, Dundas Junction, the Great Moa. Good morning to Chris May. Let's see. Pine Valley Railway, Dundas Junction, Dundas, BN Ironwood. And yeah, that looks like all the people I can catch in the chat right now. So good morning to all of you. So what I thought I would do this morning is I'm working on some structures. I'll get to that in a second. You can start to see behind me that I'm starting to reestablish my city. And I thought what I would do is I would show you, I just did a little bit of shopping, not really an unboxing video, so to speak, but this week was really long. This was a long work week, and so come midday Friday, I decided that I was done, and I thought, you know what? I looked through the couch and dug out as much loose change as I could, and I decided to head down to Otter Valley Railroad, and with no goal in mind, but decided to pick up a few things. In truth, I wanted to get a few scratch building supplies. So that was the main thrust of it, but I looked around and got some other stuff. And so let's put this over here. And so one of the things I picked up was I did get some styrene sheeting. There is metal siding available, and it's got a 1/4 millimeter or 3/4 millimeter spacing in the siding, and I find that even though this is considered siding, it looks a lot like galvanized steel, and so I wind up using a lot of this to make things like roller doors and grating and fences and stuff. So it was nice to get a bit of this. And then the other one is sort of paper thin, plain styrene. I find that this works really well for things like reestablishing spaces. So I have a couple railway stations that have got cottage roof lines, which means that, all three sides, and I want to change them to gable roof lines. And so I should be able to take this and sort of score and snap and recreate the roof lines. But as it's only a 1/4 millimeter thick, it really doesn't add a lot of bulk to it. So that is going to be a decent way for me to do that. It's also, because it's really thin, I can do things like back out doors with it. It's good for shimming. It adds a nice architectural detail. Because a 1/4 millimeter is about 2 inches thick, roughly. 1 millimeter is 6 inches, so it's about 2.5 inches thick. So it's just nice to add different little details. Good morning, YouTube. Nick Palmer, Sly Cash, you shunt, you kill me, and Paul Stamp. Good morning, everybody. And then I just picked up a couple of little detail things, which was actually some rod. As I said, I'm working on buildings, and I like the idea of sort of electrical conduits and piping and such. I sort of just add that grungy, over the top, dystopian, I guess, sort of look to it. And I've been trying to use wire, but the difficulty is that you can take like a candle or a match or a soldering iron and you can bend the styrene tubing, and it's a lot easier than, I use dowels quite a bit, and then like miter and cut and glue and sand, and so I just needed a couple little bits. So that was the first couple of things that I picked up. And then on a whim, I picked up some Wather's cornerstone roof details. I have made a lot of my own roof details in the past. I'm lucky enough to have a 3D printer, and I just run that and pump these things out. And so I saw this kit, and I looked inside, and there's tons of details in here, and it was only about $10. And so I thought that's money well spent. Because again, I'm doing a city, and sometimes roofs get slightly overlooked. And so I thought, you know what, I'll give these a try. At first glance, they might be a little bit primitive, but it really isn't going to matter. But you know what, I'm happy to have them. I'll pop those open and I'll do a bit of work on some of the structures that I'm playing with. So that was the reason I went there, was to get a few scratch building stuff. And then I sort of got into a bit of a treat yourself moment where I bought some freight cars, which, yeah, I know, shock. And so I picked up a pair of the Aurora Miniatures Greenbrier boxcars. So you're asking yourself, I thought you ran passenger trains, why are you buying boxcars? Well, it's twofold. So I've added a small yard based on Stewart Yard in Hamilton, Ontario. My version of the yard is probably 1% of what the yard actually is, and I have been enjoying sort of going to either shows or online and finding just unique pieces to add to that yard. I don't have a lot of freight cars, and so it's nice to pick a few up. And I sort of just want to have a bit of shift in my approach, which is to say to continue to support maybe smaller manufacturers and such. And so Aurora Miniatures does, you know, amazing work. And I had seen other people talk about the boxcars, and I went in and I took a look at them, and they're beautiful. I'll open them up a little bit later, but I thought, you know what, we might as well add two of them. And one of the interesting things that I have been trying, and that's worked out really well, is using AI to help me find equipment. And so when different people have released equipment, meaning freight cars and such, I take all of the road names and I say, what's the plausibility that this car would show up in Hamilton, Ontario, which is the centralized freight area? And it turns out that TTX, these boxcars, would be flooding that particular area. No problem, completely plausible. But there are other road names that would never show up. And so outside of, let's say, rail fanning and trying to find appropriate equipment, it is sort of a nice cheat sheet to be able to say, hey, they're releasing all these cars, do they fit? Another good example would be some of the center beams that Rapido is got on order or releasing, and the lumber loads. Same thing with that. Took a look at them, and there is definitely some lumber loads coming through Montreal and Quebec City that would land in Hamilton 100% of the time. And there's also cars that would never land there. So if ever you're a little thin on the research, like sometimes I am, it's a kind of a cheat sheet to figure out what is appropriate. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into these. I have every intention on weathering them very heavily, and trying some new techniques for adding graffiti to them. So the idea is that they will never hit the railroad looking nice. So, you know, get them while you're hot. A few more people have obviously jumped in here since I started. I Run Games, good morning. Approach Medium, good morning. Pat Smith, good morning to you. Todd Armstrong, good morning to you as well. And yeah, so buildings, that is why, that's what I've been doing for the last little while. Excuse me. So a couple pikes ago, I spent a lot of time building structures, and it is probably one of my favorite things to do. And then I built the new railroad, and I built a couple structures, and I tore out that railroad, and then I started this railroad, and I haven't built any structures. And it's bothering me because it's roughly 18 months since I started working on my city. And so you can start to see the skyline behind me is filling in, and that's a lot of the old buildings that I've built over the years. And I just felt like it was about time that I took a pause from wiring or fascia and other big things and returned to parts of the hobby that I really love, and that's scratch building, or kit bashing more so. And I want to build up the city. I've got dozens and dozens and dozens of buildings that I need to make, and it's a lot of fun, particularly the sort of kit bashing aspect of it, because it's kind of an automatic thing. You just sit down and or at least for me, you sit down and you start piecing things together until it looks good, and just go with it. So it's not modeling off a prototype. It's just saying, I feel like making a building. I want it tall. I don't. And I'm splitting my time between two types of buildings. One is a background flat and one is a foreground building. And it's difficult to see in the skyline behind me, but it's alternating tall flats and stubby little foreground buildings, and they overlap. And it was just purely coincidental that I started setting stuff up like that. And it gives a wonderful sense of depth. The area that the buildings are sitting on is about 50 millimeters deep. That's all the space that I've allotted. And so by sort of a shallow foreground building and then a completely flat background building, I start to think that the city's having, I can see that it's going to have a really nice density, and it'll look like crippled and bad, and I'm really excited about that. So yeah, that is what I decided to start working on. And during the pandemic, I bought a lot of N Scale model kits. These guys, and they were very affordable, and they remain very affordable. Like this little building kit here, I think was about $9, and so I just bought sort of clutches of them. And I opened up some of them. I used parts of some of them, which again went into some of the old buildings. And I was looking through sort of my bits boxes and found that I've got lots of bits and pieces. And I thought, you know what? Instead of going out and buying any structures, just start putting things together based on what you have. And so that's what I've been doing. And so I'll show you what I'm working on right now, which is, and it's falling apart, is this sort of really tall, well, taller skyscraper. And it's built out of bits and bobs of this little kit. Let me show you what's in that kit here. So as I said, this is about, I think it was $8 or $9, and it's technically a snap fit structure. And these sort of tend to lean into, let's say, Japanese architecture and such. So it isn't necessarily highly prototypical for North America, but the reason I actually like the kits is that they're good enough. And for a lot of the kits, it was actually the rear of the buildings that I thought had sort of that industrial North American flair. You know, this really wouldn't show up. Some of the details are a little grossly exaggerated, like these round windows aren't great. But the feel of these kits is really straightforward. And so what I'm doing is, for this building here, which we're going to bang around with tonight, or this morning, it's combining and stacking different panels from multiple kits to build up, you know, a bit of a unique structure. And I'm also taking advantage of this, which I dislike. It's supposed to mount like that, which is perfectly fine. But again, for N scale, these windows are like HO scale, so they're sort of a bit off. And so what I've done with this guy, let's pack these up. So I've got 1, 2, 3 faces of the building, which, pardon me, which is this guy here. And I've cut out all of the window mullions because I want it to be a little more plain, so all of the window mullions have been cut out. And then a lot of the buildings, or at least a lot of the architecture in Toronto, has these open faces, so it's like supported above the city. And so this particular component, right there, I've cut it off and glued it onto the bottom, and I'm actually working my way around the corner as well. And so the idea is that this, through these archways, is actually going to be open. And then the front doors, or the entrance, will be set back to the edge of this curved insert. Now, this is certainly not based on any building that I've seen necessarily, but I just think that as a structure that sits along the back of the layout, it makes for a really sort of plausible background building. And so what I want to play with a little bit is that I need to figure out the sort of backing here. And the second thing that I'm rethinking is that realistically, the top of the windows here, there's a couple feet to the ceiling in that particular apartment, and then the roof line just suddenly shows up. And the way that this goes on is that there is probably a 6-inch ledge between the top of the roof and the face of the building, and that wouldn't be prototypical at all. I mean, this building's not prototypical, but that certainly wouldn't be a prototypical arrangement. So I think what I want to do is I want to extend this roof line, maybe see if I can't make up some little mechanical building to sit on the top of it, and then work on establishing some more of what goes inside here. So this is just snap fit together, so I'm going to just break this down. Let's switch over to the working cam. Good morning, David. Good morning, Buzzergog. Thank you, George, about it looking like Toronto. It's not totally intentional, but it's not unintentional either. With the public, so to Paul's question, would the public sidewalk run underneath the overhang? No, they don't. And this is a feature that I didn't, so when I'm downtown Toronto at Union Station, it is part of the financial district. And it feels, or it's just adjacent to the financial district. And it feels really wide open, and there are very large public spaces. And what you find, I'm not sure if you want to call it a setback or not, but these archways or raised areas there's the public sidewalk, which is usually could be 10 or 15 feet wide because this is a big area. And then these overhangs, these open overhangs, might go as deep as 20 or 30 feet as well. So when you're standing in front of a large financial building, and we're talking like 30 stories tall, the sidewalk feels like it's 45 feet wide, you know, quite big. But then you realize that you are actually underneath the skyscraper at some point. So if you want to think of it, you know, schematically, you've got a section of sidewalk, you have your skyscraper, but it's like an open canopy over top of it. And so the sidewalk feels large and spacious and open, and people can move freely. It's a detail that I didn't notice until I started looking. And so it just made sense to have these sort of setbacks on some of the buildings. All right, so I don't want to confuse the kits that I'm not using with the kits that I am using. And so yeah, these are just snapped together. And I suppose you could leave it like that. But I will glue these eventually. Good morning, Chris. Go Vier, go home. Good morning, Jason. Denny inspired me to start working on my own layout. Thank you. Hey, I run games. That's great. It's kind of one of the goals of this sort of switch to these little casual Sunday morning things is that I've said before, I like having company when I do things, and this is a nice way just to have other people to hang out with. Nick Palmer, very nice background building with a built-in background, very clever. I certainly hope that no one gives me credit for this. It's just what I observed and thought, hey, I can do that. And this ultimately comes out of the thrust to want to work on something. So I want to extend this roof line a little bit. And it would be easiest if I had some leftover materials here that would, oh my God, that actually fits perfectly. Oh, I cut this off another building. Okay, so I can extend the top of the building with that little bit. One of the things that I like to do to save my mind when I'm working on connecting flat walls is I use just a little bit of photocopy paper, whatever you want to call it, as sort of a glue shield. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to just cut off a quick strip of just some regular printer paper. Also, you can see this is how I actually live my life, is in this sort of mess. Okay, so I've got a little piece of printer paper. I've overlapped the building enough so there's a little seam. And this is one of my favorite adhesives. It is CA, super glue, but it comes in extra thin. And these are replaceable silicone nozzles with a fine little tip. It's like a bag of 100 for $8. And so I am going to just feed in a couple drops. That was a bit messy, so yeah, it's going to stick to the cutting board. So that glue is going to wick into the paper, and it's now attached to the top of the building. And unfortunately, it's attached to my cutting board, but you know, I'll deal with that in a second. And now that's like a little backing sheet for me. Wow, I really got that one. Well done. 1 second. We're going to do that again. I'm also not really precious with my cutting boards. I'm just going to add one more little piece there. There, that's far more controlled. Okay. So the paper acts as sort of like a glue edge. So that's set up. And now what I can do is I can take this other little offcut that I didn't realize I even had laying around. Let's see, which way does it fit better? I think that works pretty well. So it's in place. I know it's a bit of an obscure angle for you guys. Put a drop of glue there. Put a drop of glue there. And so hard to see, but what it is that that's now wicking into the paper, and I'm just going to let that sit for a second while it just finishes setting up. David, good morning, Denny. Have you given any thought to this point to whether you will add lighting to the layout? Yeah, I've given it a lot of consideration, and I will be adding lighting to the layout. I am just working through the details of how I'm going to do that. One of the things that I've been playing with that was new to me is, I believe they're called DuPont connectors. And they're fussy, but you can take fairly fine gauge wire like 20 and 22, and it is a small metallic connector that you can crimp onto the wires, and then it creates like a plug, male-female plug. And ideally, I don't want to spend much time on my back or on like a creeper underneath this layout. And so the thinking is that I want to be able to put in an accessories bus line, I guess we would call it, and then light the building, some buildings, and then have these connectors coming out of the bottom so I can just feed it through a small hole and plug them in. And that way I have to take it off. It's a lot more modular, or at least portable. When I was working on my previous layout, I hardwired a lot of things, and it just continued to get into the way. And so the overall theme for this layout is convenience and enjoyment. And so if it's too hard, I don't want to do it, and if it's no fun, I don't want to do it either. And so I think for sure I'm going to add lighting, and these little, I think they're called DuPont connectors, is likely going to be the route that I move forward. That's how I'm hoping I'm going to take care of it. Good morning, Glenn. Okay. So there, even though it looks a bit lousy, that piece of paper is saturated and that top piece now is in place. I'm just going to flood it with a bit more glue. And the super glue sets up super fast. And I do have accelerant, but... Okay, so that's all set up now. Trim the paper. Like that. Oh, it stuck to my finger. Surprise. And then, where's my emery board? Picked up a bunch of these cheap emery boards. And just give that a bit of a touch there. And so while it's not completely perfect, the top of the building's now fairly extended. So I think that's more plausible if I think about, let's go back to this camera. So I think that's a little more plausible. So you've got, let me use my face as the background. There we go. You've got the ceiling line and the ceiling of the actual room or apartment, and then now there's enough here that you have a proper roof line. So that's been added on. Pretty straightforward. This is about 1.5 millimeters thick. But this comes with all these holes in it. Let's see if you can see there. I want to now hide that with sort of like make a cornice along the top. And I think I'm going to use cardboard for that. Yeah, David, that's a good point. Let me grab a building. Hang on for a second. This is just off the back of the layout here. Let's come around. Yeah, so David's comment was about, I noticed that many model buildings overlook the elevator overrun mechanical penthouses. And so I made this structure a couple years ago. Let's see, and to your point, there's sort of the mechanical room. Now, it still is slightly implausible. It probably should have been located over the center part because that's probably where the elevator would have run. Again, sort of the depth or the height of this retaining wall is only like 2.5 millimeters, which would be 1 foot. So really this building should have been another 4 or 5 feet tall. It's the two things that I've noticed going back to the structure that I'm working on. The first story of major buildings, if you want to call it a story, sometimes it's 20 or 30 feet. And I tend to think about it in terms of houses, like 10 or 11 feet. So the first story of a lot of big buildings downtown is huge. And then secondly, we never even get close to the top of the roof lines on these buildings. And there should be more space at the top of the building. That's a bit of a blind spot to me because I just don't happen to look at those things. So yeah, there's that building. And so that's why I'm trying to add a little bit of space to the top of this one. Good morning, Mr. Exotic Viper. And Dave and Wizmalibatum. Anyway, I have some decent skills. Decent is the goal here. Okay, I want to add a bit of cornicing out here. This is some leftover cardboard from some DuPont connectors, or from Arduino motors actually. I was cleaning out some stuff that wasn't worth keeping. So let's see, where is a decent ruler? I'll use this one. And so really, we're looking at about 10 millimeters would cover that off. So let's run a 10 millimeter strip of cardboard. The other thing I typically do with my X-Acto blades is I break off the tip because I press way too hard sometimes and those fire off. And so I just take it off that way, you know, I'm not getting it in my eye. For certain, I'll be getting it stuck on the bottom of my foot at some point. Okay. So the goal here is to cover up those little holes with just a strip and then keep building that out a couple steps to make it look like some sort of cornice area. All right. So that's again a bit of super glue, and I'm really only interested in making sure it lines up at the top. There we go. So, bit of improvement. So now it's got sort of a bulky top, and I'm going to add a couple more steps to that to make it look fancy, I guess. So let me see what I have left over here. Well, I think I should probably just make, yeah, I think I'm just going to make another strip of cardboard. I mean, I have no problem using up my styrene, but this just seems to make a little more sense right now. So where the first one was 10 millimeters, this is about 3 millimeters, and I'm going to add that along the top again. And in terms of, as I keep going back to this idea of having fun, I really like the fact that I'm just bashing away, not concerning myself with hyper details is nice. I just like sort of bashing some stuff together. Now the one thing I'm going to do differently when I trim this off is I'm going to let it extend a little bit. So let me grab a little piece of plastic. This will make sense when I show it to you. This is something I've figured out through trial and error. Okay, so let me see if I can't show you what. So I've let that extend a little bit, and now it looks like it wraps around the building. Let's see if I can get the better camera. God, how do influencers do this? Anyway, this new top layer goes a little bit beyond the edge of the building, and so it actually looks like it's now, what's the word I'm looking for? So it looks like it actually is built up around the top. And already, I think that that is looking a little more convincing. All right, so I'm going to add one more detail, and I've got some scale. It's almost like 4x4 styrene that I think I'm going to use for the last little step here. This stuff here, oh, I've got a perfect little piece left. Paul Stamp, what kind of cardboard is it? It was literally the packaging off of some servos. I thought it was Arduinos. It was just some servos. I like it because it's white. It is, I would say the thickness is about the same as like a tissue box that you would get. So thinner than a cereal box, but like a tissue box, like Kleenex or whatever. I was about to throw out the box, and I'm like, hey, that's some mighty fine white cardboard, and so I thought I'll just use it. Jason, I'm pretty sure you could 3D print more wall panels or even laser cut them to make them even bigger. Absolutely, Jason, for sure. Excuse me, everyone. The thing where I run into, so Jason, you're 100% right. I could manufacture a lot of these things. I spend my day-to-day on computers, and it's my work, my profession is adjacent to some of this stuff where I'm always basically designing, and I don't necessarily want the hobby part to feel like work. And so certainly some things on this layout, like the retaining walls, designed 3D cut or laser cut, and I'm happy because I don't want to get bogged down in doing that repetitive thing 100 times. But when it comes to the kit, it feels kind of good to kit bash. I will 3D print some doors for this. I have done pipe work. I could do some details, like I made some little air conditioner units. I can't figure out where I put them. Just little crude things. But there's something about putting on music, fixing a drink, and just sitting down and bashing something together that feels, it returns to that sort of creative aspect that sometimes is just, to me, more, it's just satisfying. It's like, that's how I want to unplug, which is exactly what this is this morning. CSX, scratch building on a Sunday morning, like it really doesn't get better. All right, so I've got this last little, I think this would work out to be about a 4x4 in N scale. And I'm going to very carefully try to put this on the top of the building. I'm only going to glue one edge at a time though. I've learned not to try to glue the whole thing at once. Okay. Oh, it's bent. You dirty thing. How did I not line that up properly? Oh, good enough for who it's for. Okay. That'll do. Okay, so let's... Does this work? I can't figure out how to make this better. So I've got that on. It's extended way past. I'm going to again trim it with just a little bit of an overhang and see if that doesn't look fairly convincing. There. Can you see that there? I think that's a nice upgrade on that little building. Would that tip of using Kleenex box for doing detailing and HO scale work? Yeah, absolutely. N scale, the trouble with N scale, sometimes it's just so crude. Trains in Durham, the more you build, the more you expand your skill set. Nick, what's the best way to... All right, it's great to see some questions. So I feel that scratch building gets easier as the scale goes up. I love my HOS and O scale friends, only because you can fine tune things a little bit more. So again, this is probably, this piece of cardboard is probably about 0.5 millimeter thick, which means that's about 3 inches in N scale, which means it's 1 inch in HO. So because that's roughly the ratio, like double. As for scale rulers, I don't use a scale ruler because I cheat. And in N scale, roughly speaking, like broad strokes, 2 millimeters is a foot, 1 millimeter is 6 inches. And so I'll say, okay, so if a door is 6'8", let's round that to 7 feet, which means it's 14 millimeters tall, and I'll cut a 14 or 13 millimeter hole, right? And so that's how you can get sort of the high speed. HO is just kind of double that, right? Like a door would then be 7, we'll say 28 millimeters tall. Working in metric is also a little cleaner for N scale because it works out almost perfectly that, again, 1 millimeter is 6 inches. And so that's how we sort of get to this point. All right, so I like the top of the building. The next thing I want to figure out is that there are these sort of ugly seams along here. And so one of the things I could do is I suppose I could sort of fill them with putty and sand them, but that sounds like more work than I want to do. So I think I'm going to pull out some of that new styrene I have, and I'm going to put like some horizontal bands just across that area and just fill it in that way. So let's see what I can sort of pull out here. Paul Stamp, I bet you could get through that thin cardboard with textured scissors. Yes, there was an old scrapbooking kit in this house at one point, and I think they call it deckling, but it's the scissors that sort of create sort of scalloped edges and such. And for sure, I've done that. I made it once for a shake roof. I did a sort of a Gravity Falls inspired build, the shack from Gravity Falls. So this is styrene, and it is absolutely paper thin. So I'm going to run off some strips, so sort of cover up those seams. What am I thinking would be a great? 5 millimeters would be 2.5 feet. 4 millimeters. Let's do 4 millimeters. We'll do a 4 millimeter. Built like that. Again, I'm not going to be fussy because these are background buildings, but I do like getting into the groove of working on them. So, little score. Oh, and this is what I was sort of at the beginning, what I was talking about, was that I've scored that. Gosh, I can't get, and it's folded now. So I have a styrene fold like you would have with paper, and if I flood that with a little bit of cement, that's where I can use to sort of redefine some roof lines and such. Okay. Just make sure that's cleaned off. And this time I'm going to use not super glue, so it's a little more forgiving. I'm going to use a plastic cement. And although everybody knows a lot of things, don't ever use the brush that comes in this bottle. It's like, it's crude, and so I just always use inexpensive throwaway little brushes. And so I'm going to just center this up on the one side. I don't know if it's going to be, and I'm just going to touch some glue and it'll wick in. And I'm going to let that sit for a second before I glue the other side. If I do that, I'd recommend just Jake's. One gets loose and falls apart easily, but it says a positive. So X873514, I appreciate that piece of advice. I'm still, again, I'm seeking like the KISS principle, something that I can do repeatably and reliably, and that's a great little piece of advice there. I will take a look at those. I think last week or the last time we met, someone else had mentioned those connectors, so I appreciate that. So that little drop of cement over here is set up enough that this is a bit flexible. So I'm going to flood out, and that'll wick up into it. So leave that for a second. Let's see what we've got going on in here. I should really go to sleep, but trains, right? Well, it's nice. It's a quiet time. It's quiet in here, and as I said, it's going to be warm today. So I might spend more time than I need to. After this, I probably should cut the grass, which is going to be like Conan's wheel outside, but here we are. Okay. So that's set up nicely. Let's give that a bit of a trim and see what we think. The other thing that I have been learning as I'm kind of trying to sort these things out is that there is a significant lack of skyscraper kits out there. I think the last time we had, I was on a stream and we were talking, I was mentioning how there's only about one type of train station available in the world, and skyscrapers, it's pretty thin. That said though, the Japanese markets have tons of skyscrapers. Like Kato even in themselves have some kits that are quite excellent. The only problem is that skyscraper kits are, of course, wild expensive. And so this is a way for me to make a fairly affordable building. So let's see what we think. So that covers up the seam, and whether or not architecturally that's plausible, I like it. I like that it gives the building some variety and it's got some sections. So let's cover off that last seam the same way. I wonder if that piece of plastic is going to be big enough. Of course not. Okay, so that goes into the use you later. I said 4 millimeters, yes. Knock off a few more 4 millimeters ones. One of the other things that I do before I finish this cut, nothing's going to show up, I'll maybe try to explain it too, is that I find that when I'm cutting styrene, let me try to explain this. When the blade itself is passing through the styrene, it's effectively pushing the styrene open, right? Like you're basically pushing yourself down through the styrene and trying to open up a slot that you snap and break. And one of the things that I have found really works well is to drag the back side of the knife through it, and that scrapes out a channel and it seems to break a lot cleaner. So I don't know if it'll show up here, but if I take the back side of the knife and run it along, it's very hard to see, but yeah, it has basically plowed out a channel, and it'll fold and break along that edge now a little cleaner. Good morning, Sparky. When I go to some of the train shows in the States, there's a company that does a lot of skyscrapers, but as you said, they're super costly. Yeah. There is someone on Instagram, and I forget what his name is, but he's just building a city with skyscrapers, and between eBay and a few other private manufacturers, he's built a wonderful looking city. And I think a lot of times what I have found is my sense of scale is actually pretty poor. Because if you're around like 40-foot box cars and water towers and pump sheds and, you know, a 2-stall roundhouse or engine shed, you get sort of lured into the idea that things are like this big, right? Like it's only this big. And it's not until, you know, you walk around something like a stadium or an arena or even these skyscrapers that you realize, man, like 45 stories is really tall. In Toronto, we have the CN Tower, which is one of the world's largest freestanding towers, and was the largest for quite some time. And to do it in N scale, I think it needs to be 16 feet tall. Well, my lighting fascia to the top of the layout is roughly 22 inches. So I could basically get 1/8 of the CN Tower visible, and the base is like an 80-gallon drum. And so just imagine I take an 80-gallon drum and just shove it into the skyline, and there we go, CN Tower. And so generally speaking, we have a lot of selective compression when we're building all these things, and it messes up my sense of scale because, you know, this is this is roughly 10 stories tall, and in a big city, 10 stories doesn't even show up on the skyline. My paintbrush was here. It was right here. I used it. There's the glue. The paintbrush was right here with it. Oh, there it is. Out of curiosity, for the people who are hanging out with me, how many people scratch build or work with styrene on a regular basis? Approach medium. That's how I cut styrene too. The blade is more likely to stay straight and not drift. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Especially on styrene, you're holding it against the plastic, and you run it and you think you've done well, and the thing's gone like 6 inches off kilter as it moves across. Basically plow and snap. It's also, I don't actually know what these Outland scale models are made out of. Like, I actually don't know what the type of plastic is, but it works with plastic cement, so it does weld perfectly. Okay, so there's the second one put on, and I'm just going to trim it just a little bit proud. So I've got those two done, and I'm going to do one more now across the bottom, but I think I'm going to make it a little dressier. Approach medium. I do more kit bashing than scratch building. I mean, in fairness, I don't think I do almost any scratch building so much as kit bashing. Again, I appreciate scratch building if you want to do something specific. I think the kit bash part is satisfying because you get something original, but at the same time you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So backside of the knife to plow out the groove. Let's put that down over here. Todd Armstrong, a ton of kit bashing for sure. Sparky, I've got a couple of buildings I need to St. Thomas Yard. Yeah. I've been fortunate enough to visit Sparky's layout. This is really bugging me, just a second. To visit Sparky's layout a couple times, and the St. Thomas Yard that he's modeling is going to be beautiful. I mean, it already is impressive. There's a series of, I think is it a red brick? Is it row houses or an industrial sort of complex? But it's huge. Like, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, Sparky, it looks like it's at least 3 feet long. And you don't realize how big some of these things actually are. Approach medium. Denny, do you ever use any of the DPM modular kits? I have about 7. When I made that purchase from that gentleman to get all the buildings for the yard, there was a ton of DPM kits in there. The only thing that I would say about them, and I think I talked about this last time, is that there is historic parts in Toronto, for sure. Like, Toronto is one of the older cities in Canada, and Hamilton's also an older city. And there are definitely pockets that are turn of the century. And when I say turn of the century, I mean the one previous to the one that we're in, which was yellow and red brick buildings, double brick. And so the DPM kits fall right into that pocket. But Toronto, Ontario really embraced what they call brutalist architecture, which is poured concrete structures. And so when I take a look at George Celios's Franklin, South Manchester layout, and it's all these lovely Depression era huge brick buildings and posters of like girls smoking cigarettes and weathering and all that kind of stuff. It's an amazing mood, and it's not quite the right thing for here. So the DPM kits, yes, I've got some. I'll figure out something to do with them, probably turn them into building flats, because it really doesn't work as like a regular building. But in terms of period, I think to an earlier comment, when someone said, hey, your skyline reminds me a bit of Toronto, it's probably because they're not brick. They're mostly poured concrete, which is one of the less obvious features of this area. So to Sparky, yeah, headquarters back in the day, and it's 5 feet long, right? So 5 feet long in HO scale would be 2.5 feet in N scale, and that is a sizable part of the layout to take up. Yesterday I was at the one and only N Scale train show in Germany, and I saw an HO weathering guy to weather N Scale for the first time, and he went like, "Oh, now I see the appeal of N Scale." So I want to put that, I'm going to put it about like that. Styrene and styrene glue is a little more forgiving too. It's really nice to work with. Next time I'll zoom the camera in a little bit more. Is there a chance we might see some cyberpunk influence leak into your layout in addition to the overall dystopian feel? Absolutely. And so that is why I bought all of that tubing, is so I could start to add pipes. You're not going to see neon. I've looked into how to do N-scale neon, and that's a non-starter. But definitely that sort of mix of over-industrialized and updated. There is a wonderful book actually about Blade Runner, and they talked about the way to sort of capture that Blade Runner aesthetic is to make sure that you keep all the old stuff and continue to retrofit them. So, you know, one of the great examples was actually about parking meters. And so you had the original parking meters, and then you had another unit on top of it so you could use like a credit card. And then the next one was how you would use an ID badge. And so they keep gluing things on. And so the aesthetic is really based on set up a building such as this and then put some modern features on it. And so, you know, that's part of the reason that I'll probably put like air conditioning units and lots of piping down the front, because the building was not, you couldn't retrofit it from the inside, you had to retrofit it from the outside. I think probably the aesthetic I'm looking for is on the cheap. Okay. Oh, that's a bit crooked, isn't it? So I'll just shove it around. Oh, now it's not crooked anymore. Okay. So I think that's actually looking a lot more plausible, even though the bands are used to conceal the joints. I think that now it has sort of a stepped look, and I think it looks a little more convincing. So let's add another detail here. Microbyte, I'm an N-scaler since 1975. You are one of the original generations of N-scalers. You felt the original pain with pizza cutters and all the other things. I think I'm going to add an additional little bit up here. Yeah, I think I'm going to do even more than that. Okay, so let's use a piece of this. The other thing that, and again, I'm sure I have a daughter who's in architecture, and so when I have a realization and I tell her about it, and she just looks at me like, yeah, that's common knowledge. But one of the things that also with a lot of the buildings that are mid-century that I'm learning is that from about this point down didn't look like this point up. And so this is where you might get some brick facades and different coloring and ornamentation. So at least when you were walking down the street and you didn't lift your chin very much, you were like, what a beautiful street. And then as soon as you looked up, the buildings tapered off really quickly and became just straight old ugly. And so my goal is just to dress up this little spot just a little bit more. And I think I'm going to do that with 2 more sort of layers of cornicing. I'm going to use cardboard, and then I'll use that last little bit of styrene. So first of all, I just want to get this down a little bit better. Okay, so if that's 4 millimeters, let's go for a 2 millimeter strip of cardboard. So this sits over here. Yeah, 2 millimeters. So now I'm using the cardboard for no good reason, because it's just laying here. Yeah, perfect, okay. And so obviously I need to dip back into the super glue. Glen Power, DPM kits are very era specific. I have a couple of them and they are nice, perfect for the old time. Yes. Dave, okay, so Dave, okay. So this is a deferred project that I need to get to, which is to take a 3x3 square of wood and use a speed bore bit and put my glue in it, because this is probably my 3rd bottle this year, and it coincides with having new cutting mats because I knock them over all the time, which is why you'll notice I keep putting the lid back on. Not smart enough to make a holder, but smart enough to put the lid on it. Okay, so this is super glue, just one little drop. So that's on there. Okay. Let that set up for a second. I love N-gauge stuff and even bought some track, but when with fingers like cow teats, oh my God, you're killing me. I grew up on a dairy farm, or adjacent to a dairy farm, so that really resonates with me. The other thing that I do with these as I'm working on them is that I'll get to a point that I feel like this is getting kind of ugly, and I'll hit it with gray primer, and then I'll continue on. I'll set it up and I'll leave it, and then I'll just keep returning to them. I've got about 4 buildings on the go right now that I'm slowly working on for this city, because I'm just going through this box of kit bits and just deciding to not use them up, but as I mentioned at the beginning, I just miss making things, and so that's the goal. This is really fussy at this point. Okay. This is going to be the make or break in this whole project right here. I think I got it. Okay. Let's do a bit of a trim and then call it good. There, okay, that's okay. Let's see, will this show up over here? Not bad, it's a little on my screen, but maybe you can see that. Let's pop up here. So you can see I used some styrene and some cardboard and a little bit of dimensional styrene. And so now this has got a little prouder, thicker bottom on it. Again, architecturally, I don't know if this is very accurate, but I sort of like the stance of this now. So, yeah. And then what'll happen is I've started in on it, but this is a little doorway, and they'll sit back probably half the depth of the building. so that you can walk underneath this sort of atrium area that sits beneath the building, and then this little doorway will be back there. Yeah. Let's see what's going on down here. I'm scratch building a truck stop, fuel in N scale. It ain't easy. I have fat fingers. Yeah, these are good for lifting bricks. Sometimes they're not so hot for N scale. Let's see what else is going on here. You sort of have to watch me read. I feel the pain. I'm using my train layout as a wargame terrain. N scale 2 and so is that 10 millimeter I run games if you're using an N scale, or you're just using like the regular 1 to 28 scale? Jerry Smith, half round, angle, etc. Plaster struck shapes make great cornices. Yeah. What I've done in the past is I actually sometimes will just 3D print a full cornice. When I was at the hobby shop picking up some of the stuff yesterday for this project, I was looking at the plaster struck shapes, and I'm all for it. It was just that I could easily walk out of there with $100 worth of little plastic bits, and so I said, you know what, I'm going to do something that's fairly primitive, and just keep building it up with sort of flats and squares. And when this has got a touch of paint on it, I don't think, I think it's going to be great. Like, I think for what I'm doing, this is going to wind up pretty good. Put a bit of a sand on some of these little things here. Putting that door back an inch really adds the realism. Yeah. I didn't think that I would get to a point where train spotting was actually looking at the buildings, but you know, when I visited West Harbor and I was walking around that station there, you know, I realized, you know, things like how big parking spots are, or how deep an actual sidewalk is, how big station platforms are. I mean, it comes as no surprise that the trains are big. But, you know, if you haven't had a lot of experience standing beside a train, you suddenly realize this is, you know, more than a story tall and weighs, you know, several tons. And so, again, walking around Toronto and actually paying attention to your surroundings, sidewalks are huge down there. And so, but you think about a sidewalk in a residential area, which is about 4 feet wide, and up there it's 20. And so this is where, you know, I am very excited for the Toronto area and the West Harbor towns. I really, in short order, want to be able to lay those bits of foam down and start very seriously trying to plan a city. In my mind's eye, I can imagine that if I get the size of the sidewalks and the roads correct, it'll look more like a city than the choice of the buildings. So long as the spacing is correct, I will be able to put sort of, I think it'll be more relaxed about the era and style of building that I drop on there, because it'll automatically feel more realistic, or at least more thought out. That's that sort of civil engineering thing that I think is very, very interesting. I just want to clean this up a little bit. I was a little bit generous. You know what, I'll use this little file instead. Just give this a big clean. Yeah, that looks better. Thank you very much, Sly Cash, and welcome. So not bad. And so what I will need to do, so I've left the edge of the cornice sticking out, and where is the rest of this building? Right, and so when I get to the point, so this goes on here, and then I will extend the cornice down the sides. But for the time being, I've left it like this, and I will glue it together, and I might actually use a bit of baking soda to fill any sort of gaps, and then just sort of file and sand it down. So I had no idea where I was going to wind up today, but this is good. And so the way that I like to do this, or the way that I'm doing it right now that feels fun and is rewarding, is that I'm going to stop on this. I'm going to set it up just as a skyline building. And over here, those are two skyline buildings that I'm also working on. And so pause on this one, put it up against the layout, and then pull the other two down off the back and continue sort of puttering away with them. As I said, I've got some styrene rods and such. So I'll just keep sort of picking away at them in a rotation, in a cycle. And then print off some signs. I'm going to work on some graffiti templates. And the goal is to build 3 flats and 3 foreground buildings sort of as a group. And so it's a bit like an instant city. Well, not instant, but an instant city. You know, I think that I have made enough progress that I'm happy about. So I think that probably makes for a good stopping point for this morning. Thank you for coming to hang out with me. It means a lot that we've got such an active conversation and going back and forth. And that's sort of exactly the point of this sort of casual Sunday thing, is that, you know what, in the absence of a club or a neighbor who's got a layout, I think this is probably the next best thing. So, with that, thanks for stopping by and hanging out with me. I hope everyone has a fantastic, productive and lazy Sunday. And you know what? I'll see you next time. Have a good day, folks.